We are ready now to start the first of our breakout sessions for today, and this one, as I'm sure you've noted, is called Failure is an Option, and it's the importance of taking risks and learning from mistakes. And I'm delighted to welcome our panel of contributors to this session. Trying to work out left, right. First, from my left, we have Jo Shepherd, and next to her, Sarah Rapson, and then Charlotte Clark. Jo is an HR organisational development consultant at HMRC, and she tells me, I'm sure it's not possible, but she tells me that her career in the civil service spans about 20 years already. And she's also worked in the Department for Work and Pensions and in the MOD. Sarah is the Director at the Financial Conduct Authority and was previously at the Home Office, where she was the DG for UK visas and immigration. And prior to that was the Registrar General for England and Wales. But in addition to a career in the civil service, she's also had experience in the private sector in retail and banking. And Charlotte is the Director for Pensions and ALB, and I have to confess I had to Google what ALB means, arm's length bodies apparently, ALB partnership at the DWP. There's lots of acronyms. I'm trusting and assuming that everybody is familiar with all of our departmental acronyms within the civil service, so apologies for that. Prior to that, she was the head of the pension and savings team at the Treasury. So I'm going to hand over first to Jo to start off this session. Thank you.
Okay, good morning everybody. It's really great to just look out and see so many faces kind of looking back at me. That's really fantastic. So as Fiona kindly said, my name's Jo Shepherd. I'm currently an organisational design consultant at HMRC, and I lead on their Culture and Values project. Prior to that, I was the Head of Leadership and Engagement at the Ministry of Defence. Prior to that, I worked in DWP, working my way up from kind of a New Deal advisor. Does anybody remember New Deal advisors? Yeah? Way back when? Yeah? I can see like two people. That shows how old I am. I can see two people smiling at me. So up to a senior manager in DWP, and I led large teams, so across 4 sites, and I managed around 400 people. I've also kind of worked in fraud, external relations, I've managed job centres, I've worked on projects, I've done change, I've done business development. So you name it, I've basically done it throughout my civil service career, which is the beauty of the civil service, I guess, that you can just do so many different things. They're tough jobs. I've done some really tough jobs. I've managed small teams, large projects, big operational teams. So I've had a really, really varied career, which I'm really lucky and grateful for. And whenever I stand at one of these conferences, I'm normally talking about my leadership journey. And I always feel a bit of a fraud, actually, because, I'm just a person who kind of works in the civil service. But not today, actually. I don't feel like a fraud today because the content of the session is failure is an option, the importance of taking risks and kind of learning from mistakes. So I am your girl for that, basically. I'm on the money today. I'm just going to talk about a few things that have happened to me in my career. Please don't judge me. I'm going to concentrate on 2 fundamental stories. I'm not talking about the small stuff like last week when I kind of shredded some documents that I shouldn't have shredded. So I'm not going to concentrate on that sort of stuff. I'm just going to concentrate on the big stuff today. So I'm going to start with a quote. The world loves a trier. Anybody know who says that? No? Okay, I'm not surprised. It's my mum. So my mum says that. That is my mum. She's really excited to be here today. She says that basically to me after every fundamental leadership mistake I make. So when I phone my mum and kind of go, Mum, guess what happened today? You'll never guess. She always says, the world loves a trier. So that always stays with me. And I'm going to talk you through a couple of examples. And let me be clear, the reason there's only a few is because I've literally got 10 minutes. So I'm going to talk to you first of all about my kind of first leadership role. So it was frankly what I would call a disaster. I was put in charge of an office in DWP and I went in, what I can only say was all guns blazing, thinking about how I had to act. You know, when you kind of go, it's my big leadership challenge, yes, I'm in here and I'm going to rock it, I'm going to do it. I was a woman, only woman in a group of men, and I was at that time quite young. And it was really hard. I did loads of reading in advance. I thought about who were my role models, what I wanted to do, how I wanted to act, etc. And frankly, I just went in and messed it up. So if you think about kind of Alan Sugar, but slightly more aggressive, that was me in that leadership role. I tried to almost be what I would call an enlarged male version of myself, and Claire kind of touched upon that earlier, which was really interesting. And it was a really bad time. It took me 5 years to rebuild my engagement scores in that office, and it still remains the longest I've ever stayed in a job for. And the reason I stayed there was because I wanted to put right, I knew I was learning on the job, and frankly, I didn't feel as if in my leadership role, I was good enough to go anywhere else because I needed to keep learning. I stayed there to put everything right and undo the damage that I'd kind of created. And I left there 5 years later with my tail firmly between my legs, lots of lessons learnt about how to behave, react, and never again would I underestimate the value of engagement and the impact that you as a leader can have at any stage on anybody. In fact, the really sad thing about that whole period was the person I was just trying to be just wasn't me at all. My team knew that, I knew that, and it just didn't work. So I was on a kind of hide into nothing. And my kind of second example, my second thing that came to mind when I was thinking about failures in my career, comes from the Ministry of Defence. So I left DWP and I got promoted to join the Ministry of Defence as their head of leadership and engagement. And when I attended the interview, I was carrying a new handbag. I just bought it and it was fluorescent orange. And when I mean fluorescent orange, it was fluorescent orange. It really was bright. I was wearing kind of a standard interview dress, but a really fetching pair of shoes. As you can see, I love colour. I just love wearing colour. I did the interview, and when the head of the panel walked me out, he said to me, "That's a really unusual bag. Where do you even get one of those?" That should have told me something about kind of the culture there. I got the job, and I rocked up to the Ministry of Defence at Whitehall. Now, I know I've got some colleagues from Ministry of Defence here, haven't I? Yes, hello, yes, hello. And I walked up to the Ministry of Defence at Whitehall, and if you haven't been in that building, it's a bit like Rocky when he runs up the steps at kind of Philadelphia. It's a bit like that. It's a really impressive building. And I ran up those steps thinking that I'd kind of made it. This was me. I was going to, rock it at the Ministry of Defence. So I entered the Ministry of Defence, and it kind of went downhill from there. I spoke really, really differently. I acted differently. I was really loud in comparison to everyone else. And I remember whispering for 2 days because the office was that quiet. You kind of went like that. Solid. And I then knew I had a decision to make. Do I try and conform, or do I stay true to myself? And I'm really sorry to say that I tried to conform. You know what it's like? New job, you want to make some pals, you want to get in. And I was so desperate to fit in that I decided to conform. So I changed the way I spoke. I was quieter, and I tried really hard to fit in. I changed the way I dress. I got rid of the handbag, and I lasted 3 months. So 3 months of doing that. I found my performance was worse, my team were just not warming to me, and I was struggling with the sheer exhaustion of just trying to be someone else. Was I a failure? Probably yes. Did I feel that? Absolutely, I felt like a failure. So what was really fantastic was at the end of that 3 months, I just thought, I'm not doing this anymore. So I changed and I reverted back. Back came that handbag. Back came the really strong East London Essex accent, which I'm sure you're picking up today. With wine, that gets worse. And it really worked for me. So I was different, I wanted to be different, and that was why they had employed me. My team felt I was authentic, I received excellent feedback, my performance increased, and it remains the most successful that I've ever felt in any job in my career because I just loved it so much. So why am I telling you all of this? Why am I kind of laying myself bare up here? And what would be my lessons learned throughout that time? Well, a really good indication was I recently went for an interview. And when I left there, they looked absolutely exhausted by me. I came home, when you kind of look at the panel and their hair's like off their face and everything, it was just awkward, really awkward. I came home and I got really upset with my husband, and I just said to him, I felt like a whirlwind with them, and they looked exhausted by me. And he just really straight away looked at me and just went, he replied, if they don't want a whirlwind, well, they don't want you. And that was how easy it was for him, is that if, you've just got to accept what you are, and if they don't want you, so what? That's fine, that's really cool. So the only times I've kind of ever really failed is when I tried to be anything more than what I am. I have a really strong East London Essex accent, as I said. I'm a little bit Mrs. Beanish. I say the wrong things to the wrong people at the wrong time. So what are my kind of learning points from this? It's okay to apologise when you get it wrong. What I was really clear about in my first job when I talked about DWP, it's good to say, actually, I just got it wrong. I wasn't quite what I wanted to be, and that's okay, and I'm going to work at that. So it acknowledges, it shows a good level of authenticity that you're a really human leader, and we're all human. Get a level, get some perspective. You can feel really bad, but just don't beat yourself up about it. I'm really clear about what I do for a living. I work on culture and values in HMRC, and I'm lucky enough to be in a job that no one dies if I really make a fundamental mistake. So, you know, perspective is really, really good for that. And in some cases, you learn on the job. The hardest knocks definitely make you a better leader, and every mistake is an opportunity to learn. I am definitely living proof of that. And finally, I just want to leave you with a bit of a challenge, really. This is the quote that I absolutely love, just for you to reflect on. And my kind of challenge for you, if you take away nothing from my conversation today, this is what I want you to take away. Be you, the world will adjust. Don't forget, you are the person that they recruited. That's who they wanted, that's who they get, and that's warts and all. Thank you.
A bit like Jo, I've had a kind of varied career. I've worked most of the time at DWP, but I've done lots of different things. So I started off as an analyst, and then I became a policy person. I've run major programs. I've worked at the Treasury. I've worked at the Department for Education. And just in terms of kind of giving you a bit of kind of flavour, I have to say, the things that really stick with me are the things that went wrong. If you asked me to kind of talk about the things that went well in my career, we would be here for a very short time. I think we would all, we were all talking about what we were going to do for our 10 minutes, we were all going to tell personal stories and realize that we had to edit ourselves incredibly, because our stories of failure are kind of, there's many of them, and they are the ones that stick with you and that you really, really learn from. When I was talking to a colleague of mine, I was in the pub, and I was telling him I was doing this talk about failure as an option. He turned to me and said, yes, but it's not a very good one, is it? And that's kind of true, but it feels to me that failure is a completely necessary option. If you want to develop and you want to build, then failure is a really necessary option. They are the points where I've learned most about myself, they are the points where I've learned most about leadership, and they are the points when actually my career has kind of taken a slightly different turn that probably wouldn't have happened if I hadn't failed at something. I was also counting up this morning how many interviews I have been for where I didn't get the job. I decided to stop at about 20, because it started to get a bit depressing when I started to get beyond that. When I think about why we worry about failure, I think we worry that people will judge us. And that was why I really think this session's a very good thing, because actually talking about failure is a very positive thing, I think is really important. So the way that we perceive failure, I think is really important. So let me tell you one of my stories. So I had just been promoted to grade 6. I was in charge of an analytical team that was doing tax credits at the time. So I was at DWP, we were transferring tax credits to HMRC. I was new to the grade, new to the area, learning lots of things. And one of my very junior analysts came to me to tell me that he had found a mistake in the way that we had estimated something. And with all mistakes, it of course went the wrong way. And it was a very significant mistake. So it turned out that we had underforecasted it by about £1 billion. So this is when £1 billion was a lot of money. What I did, my response to it, is not something I'm terribly proud of, but what I did, we went through it and we made sure that we had made the mistake, and so we validated that actually we had got it wrong, and I then went through figuring out how it had gone wrong. So I was going to have to fess up to this to my director. He's a very nice man, but he was quite an aloof person. So I turned up for our meeting, and I turned up for our meeting knowing exactly what had gone wrong, who was to blame for what had happened, and how it had all happened. And I wanted to make it really, really clear that it happened before I had taken over. You can see where this is going, can't you? And so I sat down, and his name was Mark. I said to Mark, "We found this mistake." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes, I'm absolutely certain we found this mistake." And he asked me the question that I did not know the answer to. And the question was, what are you going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again? Which, of course, was the one thing I had not really thought about. I knew exactly who was to blame, and looking back, who was to blame, but I hadn't really thought about what I was going to do to make sure it didn't happen in the future. And to be honest, my response was, I was actually pretty annoyed by the question. You know, my response to it was, but, you know, I'm not to blame for this. This is somebody else's fault. And so, because I didn't know the answer to the question, we agreed that we would reconvene at my next one-to-one and we would talk about it. And so in the next couple of weeks, we kind of passed, and I turned up, and we started to talk about what had gone wrong. And again, you know, I was still quite annoyed by this, as though somehow I was being blamed. And he gave me a kind of quote, which has become something of a mantra to me, which is, you know, if you want to be a leader, you have to take responsibility. And how you take responsibility when things go wrong will actually define you as a leader. And that's so true. You know, when I see things go wrong, and let's be honest, we're all in jobs where stuff happens, how the best leaders and how they respond and react to those sorts of things, they are the people that you want to work for. They're not, you know, the people who, like me, were looking for who to blame. They are not the people you want to work for. And so actually, if you want to be a successful leader, you're only a successful leader if there are people that want to work for you. So how you respond and react when things go wrong, I think, is so important. I think I've probably waffled on, as I am wont to do. So I won't tell you my second story, but I just thought I'd kind of finish with a kind of... I'm always interested as to why we react to failure in this way and why we respond to it. You know, I think sometimes we're worried about putting ourselves forward because we worry how people will judge us. So we worry particularly by being ambitious, I think, as women, as though somehow we're showing off or we're boastful. You know, I think sometimes we also worry that we will be defined by our failures rather than our successes, that people will remember those things rather than actually the things that we're really good at. I was having another drink. I don't want you to get the impression that this is I was having a drink with a friend of mine who runs one of the Arm's Length bodies. And she came, we were talking, it was only last week, and she came up with a brilliant quote. And we were talking about the importance of, so one of my mantras is kind of know yourself, be yourself, back yourself. You know, that's, you know, that importance of just being able to back and understand your instinct. I think one of the difficulties of being a leader, actually any time, is getting enough quiet to be able to listen to your kind of inner voices of what are things telling you to do. And she came up with a kind of wonderful quote about how you must kind of, you know, when you back yourself, of listening to your gut. And, you know, hers was, you know, if I listen to my gut and I find the time to listen to it, then 95% of the time I know I will be right. And I think most of us know that's the case. And she said, and the 5%, they're not my failures, they're my learning moments. And so that's become my new mantra. Of, you know, these are not failures, these are my learning moments. These are the times when actually I learn the most. Right, so I will pass over. Thank you.
Well, good morning still. I got the call and they said, we'd love you to come and speak. You spoke a few years ago, we'd like to have you back. That's fun. And then so I said yes. And then they said, well, here's the title. And I thought, that's potentially career limiting, but I'm going to give it a go. And we're all friends here, right? We're all friends. It is video. I didn't know it was going to be video. No, I didn't know. It's fine. So I thought, well, I'll have a think about what stories then might be interesting. What are the moments, the many moments, you know, that might be interesting for you? And having listed out loads of them, and then worked out maybe there were a few that were a bit more interesting than others. I actually had them in two different buckets. I've got some that I would categorise as big, horrible moments of pain, and I've got a few of those stories. But I actually realised that some of them were more chronic fails. So some of them were more, I just kept doing them. I just kept repeating the same mistake over and over and over. And whereas the lessons from the big, the accidents, the dreadful ones, that I could talk about the lessons really quickly and instantly because they were sharper somehow. It was harder to pull out the lessons from the chronic ones. So I suppose I kind of leave you with that, well, I aim to leave you with that thought, that there are two categories, and I think paying attention to both of them differently is well worth it. The other thing I thought about failure is it's not all bad. In addition to the lessons that you get, being scared to fail in some industries is absolutely significant. So I'm a non-exec in an acute trust, a hospital. Being scared of failure there is incredibly important. The airline industry, really important. So actually, what is it? It's when fear gets in the way of you being able to do the thing you want to do. Your own competence. I will say your own confidence. It's when it gets in the way of the things, because some of it actually is worth having. All right, so let's talk about those big, horrible stories then. And funnily enough, they're all Home Office stories. I was both Chief Executive in the Passport Office and Director General at UK Visas and Immigration, 11 years. And maybe it's the kind of place where you just do tougher things, but certainly the biggest moments of personal failure. And I know there are some Home Office colleagues in the room, so, be kind. They're the ones I've chosen are from the Home Office, and I'll draw out the lessons as well. So I was new Chief Executive of the Passport Office, and it became really clear we didn't have enough work for the amount of people we had in the organisation. And it's always the grimmest job as a leader to know you've actually got to restructure and you've got to shrink the organisation. And even more so in a politically sensitive environment. And so we pronounced that we had to shrink one of the passport offices. And the job I had was to make sure that the politicians were on board, because this is a very difficult thing to do. Things were moving so fast, I ended up in front of both my minister and the relevant Secretary of State without the proper briefing. So I couldn't answer some of the basic questions about the details of the different offices and how many staff, etc. And it was just dreadful. Dreadful. In fact, I don't want to talk about it. And the ministers got quite cross. I mean, it really was just dreadful. And I reflected, we came away and I reflected and I thought, well, actually, I think I've lost their confidence on this topic. I'm going to put somebody else in because it's really important that this happens properly. So I need to put somebody else in to lead the conversations with the politicians from now on, because the objective is much bigger than me. I'm a distraction. I need to put my ego to one side and focus on the objective here. So I suppose what's the lesson? There were loads of lessons in the whole topic, but in that particular case, it's not about you sometimes. So it's not personal, it's about the politics. And if you can kind of take yourself out of what it is you're trying to achieve, all those little voices, those inner voices telling you can't do stuff kind of fall away. So focus on the overriding objective of what you're trying to achieve. Story number 2, UK Visas and Immigration. Back in 2013, if you remember, the UK Borders Agency was scrapped very publicly by their then Home Secretary, now Prime Minister, calling it closed, secretive and defensive, and I became the first Director General of the created UK Visas and Immigration. UKBA was split into UKVI and Immigration Enforcement. And my job at that time, in my view, was to create, to support the 7,000 people in that organisation to become a trusted and competent, publicly seen as competent organisation. So, I came from the Passport Office, I'd not worked in UKVI, and I started making changes and deciding we were going to do things, and I had my 100 days plan, and didn't seem to be making any progress at all, and in fact seemed to be irritating irritating everybody. And then somebody fabulous took me to one side and said, Sarah, could you just stop? We're not ready. Some of us are in mourning. You're offending us by saying that things here aren't working, because I'd been listening to the politicians. Could you just stop? And I thought, crikey. He was very brave. He was very brave. And I thought, that is fantastic feedback. I need to listen to that. My lesson was always bother as a new leader to understand the backstory. Learn about the history of an organisation. Learn and find out what is going on for the people you're now working with. And I have taken that lesson in every job that I've gone so far. So at my new job, Financial Conduct Authority, they had just been through a massive restructure as I arrived, and I just took 2 months just to listen. And I thought, I'm not going to do that again. And actually get them to tell me, what are they really proud of? What works really well around it? And do you know what? We're going to keep that. Not only that, we're going to make it better. Sorry, not make it better. We're going to keep it, and we're going to revere it. You know, I've kind of lost that whole sort of not invented thing. If it works, we carry on. We'll fix the stuff we need to fix, and we'll do that together. But I'm not going to come in and throw baby out with the bathwater like there was a chance that I might have done, I think, at UKVI. Story number 3, UKVI story. And again, I talked to you about wanting to build confidence in the competence of the organisation. So in my first couple of months, I remember getting back to my desk, and my executive assistant had said to me, there's a whole bunch of people I've collected for you in an office just behind you. You need to go and take half an hour to find out about an operational issue, because in half an hour you're going to go and tell the Home Secretary about it for the first time, because she doesn't know. So we sat there, and it became clear that one of the case officers had made a decision on an immigration case related to an individual who it was a very public, very politically sensitive case, and had made, with the incorrect information, I might add, the wrong decision. And I remember walking in half an hour later to the Home Secretary and explaining what had happened. She was very personally identified with this particular case as well. You know, that was very scary. She did that head thing that she does, where she puts her head on the desk. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I think that might be... Anyway, this is on video, isn't it? And she is actually the Prime Minister, so I should probably quiet down. But what do I think about that? In that moment, I thought... and Charlotte, you just touched on this, and that's the problem with going third, because some of the lessons are already shared. But how you receive that information, people are watching you as a leader, and your response to it. And I sat there thinking, but actually, let's not do that blame thing, because we haven't got all of the full facts. And actually, if you want an organisation, a healthy organisation with a positive culture, where people feel that there is psychological safety to be able to share mistakes, talk about what has gone wrong, then how you react in that moment where people are giving you the bad news is really important. And I feel very, very passionately about that, and I try to do that. But secondly, your team also need to know that you're going to stand up, and you're not going to stand in front of the Home Secretary and say, my case officer. You're going to say, I'm really sorry. And that's really powerful. So your team know that you've got their back as a leader is really important. Right, so let's talk about some of the chronic fails then. I've got just some thoughts on those, really, because they were harder to draw the lessons from. There is some research that shows that when women speak up, they are judged more harshly, I discover. And I think I kind of feel that a bit. And I spent years coming in late to conversations. In meetings, I'd think about what I wanted to say, but I'd get to the end and I hadn't said it yet. And I looked back over 3 or 4 years of appraisal feedback was, could you just talk a bit more? Because we know when you talk, you have something really interesting to say. We want to hear from you. What is it that's holding you back? And I thought, I've had that feedback for the 5th time now, 6th time now. When am I actually going to do something about it? Why am I repeating the fail every single time? And I just decided that I was going to stop, and I was just going to practice. So, rather clumsily, sometimes I'd decide I'm going to talk first. And that would either work or it wouldn't. And then sometimes I would say, right, I'm going to talk in the middle, and I'd either get there or I wouldn't. And then sometimes I'd try and do that summary thing at the end, and that would either work or it wouldn't. But I decided that I just needed to say, because I knew that I had the evidence that people wanted to hear what I had to say, so I should just do it. And I'm now a non-executive director at a hospital, I told you. I'm even practicing it further. I'm giving myself permission to just talk in the moments where I've had that idea. I have a view on that. I'm just going to go for it. And I have to say the feedback is really positive. So I'm now using that back in my day job at the FCA and doing that. I'm more confident in doing that because I'm also practicing it in perhaps it feels like a safer environment. The other thing is, the lesson is around say what you actually think. Be authentically you, and I think that has come out through colleagues earlier. I was called to the select committee for an introductory hearing with the select committee when I first got the DG job at the Home Office, and they said, "We want to hear what you think." And I said, "Well, I will tell you." And I'd done a bit of training, the select committee training, probably not enough. And they said, "Well, when will you have finished the job, Miss Rapson?" And I thought, well, how can you possibly think that immigration is ever going to be resolved? It's a bit like the health service. You will always have to work hard at making these things better in these complex systems. So I said something like, well, of course, it will never be fixed. Because that's what I think. And it must be true, because you must and it's the same at the hospital. We'll never fix the health service, because you just always must keep going, right? Anyway, that was the splash in the Sunday papers. With a photo, I think, as well. And I spent the weekend thinking, I'm not quite sure what happens when I turn up to work on Monday, because I'm not sure I was supposed to say that. I remember walking into the Home Office building that Monday morning thinking, I just don't know where today's going to go. It could go anywhere. And I remember one of the special advisors giving me a quick buzz and saying, "Well done. What you didn't do was give them a date. Because if you'd given them a date, that would have been a hostage to fortune. Well done." And I remember thinking, oh, okay, I did actually think I might get sacked. So what do I think? You just be authentically you, say what you think. And don't let that little inner voice that sort of self-controls or self-certifies, don't let that take over. Because you're wiser. We're wise people. And on the topic of wisdom, and I will wrap up now, I think, so we've got time for questions. A wise and clever woman said something to me recently, which I am holding very, very close. I have done since she said it. And she said to me, "I realised that I'm no longer afraid of failing." And I thought, wow, that's something, isn't it? To genuinely feel that you're not afraid to fail anymore. How liberating. And I think as I've got through the years through my career, I think I've got less afraid of failing. I've been practicing for longer. But there are still moments where I think I'm a bit apprehensive. It's a bit nerve-wracking standing up in front of 400 fabulous women and talking about your failures, frankly. But you give it a go. But I think get to a place where you're not afraid to fail. What might be possible? And I think so. I'm holding that, and I offer you that. In summary, then, I think that the big, horrible, painful fails, I think you'll remember those lessons because they're just sharp and acute, and they hurt, and they will stay with you. But the chronic ones, so where you are making the mistake over and over and over again, and I would argue perhaps we've all got some of those. What about paying attention to those ones? You've come to this session today to learn, to hear about how turning failure into learning is part of leadership. What about paying attention to those ones and actually practicing the lessons arising from those and shrinking that learning time? I would offer you that. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all of our panellists for, I think you'll agree, a very honest and open contribution, and I would like to thank you for being so honest and open. And I don't know about anybody else, but I always find it quite reassuring to hear about the mistakes or the doubts or the anxieties of people who I look at and think are very successful and very strong and excellent leaders. And when you are able to share in that way those kind of learning experiences, I think it gives hope for all of us. I'm going to open the floor to questions. Once again, please, if you can wait for the microphone, tell us where you're from and who you are. We'll take lady at the front here and another one in the back there. If you'd like to go first.
I just wanted to thank you very much for those stories. I think it's very reassuring to hear that other people fail too. I'm Martha Beath, I'm from Fitch Solutions. I actually wanted to ask, I thought what Sarah was saying about chronic failure is really true, and it's interesting to hear about failure over time. I'm mostly interested in asking the question to the panel, when you're talking about failure over time, how do you separate those kind of true failures from the noise? Because obviously we all get feedback over time. And what do you do to correct those things?
And I think maybe if we take a question from the lady just there at the end of the row.
Again, thank you to the panel. My name's Liz Freitas and I'm from the Home Office. So I recognise the UKVI examples. Thank you. I was just going to say that one thing that resonates with me, and it's just something I would just like to share, and it is something I saw at a school, and something that I think that we should all remember, that if you actually use the word FAIL as an acronym, it actually stands for First Attempt in Learning. And I think that that is something that we should always remember.
That's lovely, thank you. We'll maybe take another question then. The lady on the front row here, just in the middle.
Again, I just wanted to thank you all because it's really motivating and inspiring to hear your stories. I'm Becky, I'm from DEFRA, and what I found really interesting about all the stories is you didn't ever say the word, but you were all talking about accountability, and I think that that's one of the best human traits that anyone can ever have. And I just wondered if it was particularly those moments that you were talking about, or if you had a particular process and how you approach your life to carry through accountability and help others be accountable.
Thank you. Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to start with the first question. That's a really difficult one. I think the first question, about feedback and how do you understand what are your chronic failures and what are the things that you really need to do. I think it links to something that Claire was saying as well about, I think all too often we get a little bit fixated on weaknesses, so things that we're not particularly good at. And I think it's trying to find the time and the space and the right people to what are the things that you could do to be a better version of yourself, at the same time as not getting too hung up on those things which actually you're not that interested in. Other people come. So I had a line manager who used to tell me that I should be more organized. And I kind of think, and I would try and do that a bit more and try to be a bit more organized, but that's not me. And putting my time and energy into that, was just a bit of a waste of my energy. I'm a bit more kind of impetuous and a bit more kind of ideas focused, and actually that's what I'm good at. So focusing on things that I'm not good at. But I think Sarah's point's a really good one of there are still things where I kind of think, okay, actually I keep on repeating that mistake, and why do I keep on repeating that mistake? And why am I not learning from it? So I think that it's trying to find the time to be able to see those things a little bit differently.
Do you want me to? Yeah, so I mean, it was only in preparing for, the session today that I actually worked out that there were two types. I've not researched this topic. I just thought I need to come and say something vaguely interesting. And it was only when I was categorising that I realised there was such a thing as I just keep doing that. And so I think your point then, you've got to take the time to focus on it. Because otherwise, unless we're all invited to be up here to answer this question, so somehow you've got to find the time to, what is it I just keep doing? If I just paid attention to that and did something about that, it could be liberating. On the accountability point, I was wondering why I've always felt very accountable in all of my jobs. And is it something that's instinctive? I feel quite dutiful as a person. I think actually maybe it's a function of the kind of people that end up in public service. Because you're holding a budget, which is taxpayers' money. You're doing really important things in service of the country. Kind of feels really important to make sure that works well. And I think my accountability comes from a sense of a deeper purpose. I feel very, very strongly about that. And I now work in the financial services sector, but we regulate the financial services sector. I feel very responsible for making sure that market operates well and that consumers don't come to harm. And then I look at some of the bankers. I feel more accountable in my role than I think you might feel in some of yours. So we have a job to do as the regulator to create more accountability in the wider sector. And that's quite a challenge. So I don't know how you tell people they have got to be accountable. I don't know how you do that.
Okay, I'll just add a couple of bits on because colleagues have really already answered those really, really well. So a couple of things. Liz, thank you from the Home Office. I really like that school failure. I love that. I thought that was really great. And I know, obviously, when Charlotte was talking as well, I've written down, they're not failures, they're learning moments. So that's something I'm going to be using in the future, definitely. And Becky, in terms of kind of the accountability thing, so I was fortunate enough in my career to work for some really good leaders and some really good role models. And one of those once said to me, your people, whoever your people are, whether that's your team, whether you're managing a team, whoever you're leading, deserve to see the best of you every single day. That's what you get that little bit of extra money that we all kind of get when we're doing a leadership role for. And actually, they just deserve that. And that really resonated with me. So for me, that is always my accountability, is that my people deserve to see the best of me every single day, the best bits of me. And if they don't, there's something not right. I'm failing in that leadership kind of piece that I'm stepping up to. I shouldn't be taking that money, frankly. So for me, that's kind of my accountability. I don't know if that helps. Thank you.
Okay. Right, we've got time for some more questions. I'm going to try and see through the lights here. So we've got a lady just at the back, towards the back row there, and another one in the middle.
Thank you very much. Fascinating talk. My name is Rebecca Handler. I'm from Cabinet Office Legal Advisors. I just wanted to ask you what I think is probably quite a tough question. How do you create an environment where people feel it's okay to fail? Because failure, as you've all recognized, is worthwhile, but it's also scary.
Thank you. There was another one just 3 or 4 rows back in the middle.
Hi, Charlotte Baker from MHCLG. You talked a lot about how, since you've reflected on some of those moments of failure, what that's meant in terms of learning. But can you say anything about how you sort of bounce back quickly from that moment of failing and that kind of instant loss of confidence that you can get when something goes wrong? How do you kind of regain your confidence quickly, and particularly when you're in a leadership role and people are looking to you to sort of solve it? How do you kind of have that resilience to immediately take action?
Thank you. And then I think there was a couple of questions. Maybe the very back there towards, yes.
Hi, I'd just like to echo the thanks as well for your inspiring talks. My name is Claire Ward from the Animal and Plant Health Agency. what I'd just like to ask, I think there's a theme going through and within the questions about risk, and you've taken risks which sometimes go well and sometimes don't go well. But I was wondering, what risks are you most proud of? Which are the ones that really took bravery, whether they worked out or whether they didn't? Thank you.
Okay, who wants to go first? Shall I go first? I'll jump in. Oh. Okay, so some really interesting questions there. I was just thinking about the kind of one that really resonated with me was Charlotte's one, where we were just talking about kind of how you bounce back quickly from when you've done what I would call an epic fail, and how you regain that confidence quickly. Well, the kind of really short answer is you don't, actually. I just kind of, after some of mine, I felt really bruised and battered. And even now, when I was talking about them just then, still feel a bit bruised and battered and a little bit kind of ashamed about what I did throughout that period. So I can't say that I've ever bounced back quickly. I think what is really important is that sense of perspective that I kind of talked about, which is just, you didn't do it on purpose. You didn't intentionally, I know very few people that intentionally set out to do something, and mess it up or do it wrong or fail or upset people or any of those things. Very few people. And actually, it's just about saying, let's get a sense of perspective over this, and I can do it better. I know I can do it better, and I'm still learning. And as I said, it's okay to learn on the job, and it's okay just to kind of go, do you know what, I didn't quite get that right, but I'm just going to do it better moving forward. And I guess that's that kind of bouncing back and thinking about, does it give you confidence? I don't know. But what it does do is mean that you're always continuously improving. And actually, I hope right up until I kind of breathe my last breath, I will be constantly learning and constantly improving. And there's nothing wrong with that, actually. And in that, there's going to be some mistakes. Yeah, there probably will be. So I just kind of think it's about the sense of perspective, really, if that helps.
A risk that you're most proud of?
Oh, a risk that so I guess a risk that I'm most proud of was I've always, so I used to work in ops in DWP, which I absolutely loved, really enjoyed it. And I kind of went for a job randomly, as I said earlier on, at the Ministry of Defence, the head of leadership and engagement, which was fundamentally in HR. And that was a massive risk for me because I'd been in DWP for about 18 years, long time. Hadn't thought about moving, and then all of a sudden just saw this job and kind of went, I'm just going to go for that one. And I got it, and the culture was really different, and it was really tough for me, and it was so weird. I can't begin to tell you how weird it was in comparison. I really realised that I had a massive ego because I thought I didn't have an ego, and then after 18 years in the department, you're the go-to person, and then when I got to the Ministry of Defence, nobody was interested in me at all, on my view. So I kind of realised I had this huge super ego, but I was really proud I made the change, and really proud that I took that risk because it worked out for me. And I'm really grateful for the opportunities it gave me, I think.
So that's interesting, isn't it? Because I was writing down what would be my top risk. Actually, it was a career choice as well. It was a decision to leave full-time employment at what was then Barclays and go and do an MBA, so be a student again at the age of 30-something. Because I thought I can do more. And I think my boss has got me in a box. And this organisation thinks I can only do X, and I think I can do Y as well. So left, great job, and went to be a full-time student. And frankly, I think the rest of my career is a consequence of having done the MBA. In terms of the other two questions, I think I can cheat by giving the same answer to both, which is, how do you create an environment in which it's okay to fail? I already talked about it's how you respond as a leader. And then the resilience point. I think part of the answer for both of those questions is around focusing on the outcome you want to achieve, not on blaming the people, not on you. Actually, what is it? Put all of that to one side. What is the outcome that we want to achieve? And try and see a clear path. And then some of that will hopefully get out of your way. And then the importance of just having some good colleagues and friends. So in those moments at UKVI, I used to wander across to the Director General of Immigration Enforcement's office, and we'd just sit there going, crikey. And you just need people who are there for you in those moments. And it's safe to say what you think and why you feel the way that the way that you do. So also having some people who can support you feels really important.
So in answer to Claire's question, no, it was Charlotte's, wasn't it, about bouncing back? I think Joe's completely right. The idea that somehow you can just, get over things, you need to process them. Failures, change, whatever you want to view it as, actually you need to kind of take yourself through that kind of curve in order to be able to deal with it. And if you think that you can just kind of jump to it, then it will just continue. In answer to the question about the biggest risk, I think the biggest, was it the biggest risk or the best risk you took? I think the best risk I ever took was on somebody else, and I think those are the ones that really resonate with me, is when actually I've either trusted someone or believed that they could do it, and they've proved me right. I can think of one particular case when we were employing, it was a summer student, and it turned out that they had a very serious criminal record, and HR thought that we shouldn't give them a job because of it. And taking the risk and saying, actually, no, I'm gonna accept the risk of actually employing this person, and knowing what that did for their life. Those are the risks that kind of stay with me, of when you've actually invested with somebody else and taken a risk with them. And I think that kind of answers the question about culture, is trusting other people, allowing them to take risks, and being open about it, that actually not all of them will pay off, but hopefully most of them do.
Right, I think we've got time maybe for another one, maybe two questions. So trying this side of the room, there's one in the middle here, 2-3 rows back. Apologies if there's been lots of people with their hands up. It's quite hard to see sometimes, actually.
Hi, my name's Rosie. I'm a fast streamer about to go into my 3rd year. I don't know if you're familiar with the performance management system for fast streamers, but it's quite intense. We have like 6-month reviews. We have to write a lot of competency examples, and it does sometimes feel like you're kind of permanently on probation and kind of applying for your own job every 6 months. We have like we're supposed to have monthly catch-ups with our cohort leaders, and we're encouraged to be open and honest and share our kind of failures and our developmental areas, and even like this large sections of our form about that. I do struggle with that, especially because my cohort leader is representing me to a panel, and they might have only met me once, and I don't want to share too much in case they get the wrong idea. And I think as women as well, we tend to like focus on our failures rather than perhaps bring up our strong points. Is there anything you would encourage? Obviously, like it's from a management, that's their responsibility as well to encourage us to be open. But is there any tips you've got for getting out of kind of performance mode and into kind of embracing kind of development mode?
And then we'll take one more over here. So just in the middle, at the end of the row, halfway down.
Thank you very much. Claire Jones from Business Energy and Industrial Strategies. So this is primarily a question for Sarah and Joe, but I'd welcome views from across the panel. It sounds like you were both put into positions where you were employed to kind of shake things up a bit, and then when you tried to kind of shake things up a bit, it kind of didn't go as you expected. I'm curious to know, how do you try to walk the line of being put into a position where your role is to be a whirlwind, as you said, but without sort of causing chaos and losing everyone as you go?
Okay. Yep. So, two of my stories, I think, that I told are about being put in to effect change. But you cannot affect change unless you've got the people with you. There's no point. And unless people trust you, buy into, what you're trying to achieve, you can manage the upwards. You can say, yes, we're doing all the fabulous things that, all the things you want shaken up we can get on with. But actually in real life, you have got, I think, to take the time to go out and see what's happening with the teams. Work out for yourself what you think is worth keeping, worth saving, safeguarding, and then getting a consensus about those things that are really up there. Everybody agrees we've got to do something about. then you have a fighting chance of affecting lasting change. If you do it the other way, you might get an instant shift. Maybe the politicians might be happy because something has changed quite quickly, but it won't be sustainable. So if you want true sustainable change, it has got to be all about the people, in my view.
So it's always awkward when you're on a panel. We're just too polite with each other, aren't we? We're just like looking at each other. I was thinking about the kind of the fast stream example that you just talked about. So a lot of my colleagues are fast streamers. I feel your pain. I know how tough that is, and I know how tough the scheme is and the demands that are on you. So it's really, really hard. In terms of kind of, you're absolutely right. You're encouraged to talk a lot about kind of your learning experiences and what you've done as kind of failures and opening up and stuff like that. And that's really, really tough. I think what's really important to me and what's really helped me as somebody that genuinely fails all the time, absolutely fails all the time, is that I try and treat them like development opportunities. So whenever I'm talking about something that actually didn't go so well for me and somebody's asked me specifically about it, I will always talk about what I would do differently if I were doing it again. And I would make sure that I approach that in the kind of language I use. So I would say, actually, I wasn't as strong in this area, so I'm really clear about the language. I wasn't as strong in this area. In future, I would do it differently this way. So it almost becomes one example of kind of what you would do differently, as opposed to it being really concentrated on the failure. Because if you're anything like me, I would talk about the failure for about 30 minutes, and they'd say, what are your strengths, Jo? And I'd go, I don't know, probably this, this, and this. Is that okay? And that would be it. So it's just about kind of almost making sure that you concentrate on it as a development opportunity and what you would do differently as a result, because we all know what we would do differently as a result, I guess.
So it just prompted me to think, if we agree that in performance women can be judged more harshly than men, if you agree with that statement, and there is some research to show, and if you agree that perhaps women can be more apologetic at times, if you agree, and it's very difficult when you make assertions like that, because it can't possibly be everybody, then I do wonder whether a more practical tip might be just watching for that in how you're writing up about yourself, and making sure that you have actually got the right tone. Making sure that you're not overdoing, because perhaps it's quite instinctive and natural for women. Again, generalisation, I apologise. And as Jo says, making sure that there is enough evidence around the stuff that's great as well, and you pay attention to that as well. If it's easier to remember the learnings from failures, which is the premise of today, than it is perhaps to remind ourselves of the learnings from successes, perhaps we've just got to work a bit harder at making sure we draw those out. So how you write down this, given that there is a process and you have got to be part of it, haven't you? How you actually characterise it feels very important. Yeah.
My advice was going to be, thinking about actually what it's going to be like when you're the manager. Because I think it's always difficult, particularly in the kind of fast stream process, of the sense that you're working for somebody's representing you who's not wholly invested in your personal success. And that's quite a difficult position to be in. It's quite an uncomfortable position to be in. Now, that doesn't just happen if you're on the fast stream. That can happen if you're working for someone who you don't have that connection with. And so I think I think all of this is really good advice about how you might present yourself to your cohort manager. But it's also thinking about the importance of trust in that relationship. So, you're at the point where you're about to take on a large management leadership challenge. So really thinking about, how am I going to embed that when I have responsibility for other people, so that they can feel confident that they can share their failures, their learning with me, and that I can help develop them.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for all of your questions and to our panellists. I think that's been a really insightful, interesting and helpful and reassuring session. So thank you very much.